Welcome to Hey Ivan, a channel where people ask a tech guy tech questions. This question comes to us from Michael, who asks, which external drive do you recommend? Michael has been using an external drive to back up his iMac for the last several years. When the drive failed, he began looking for a replacement. He asked for my opinion because he wanted to know what a good choice might be, and he hadn't done his own research yet. Before we get to his answer, let me ask you, are you backing up your computer? If not, then ask yourself this question. If my computer were to die today, is there anything on it that I'd be sad to lose? Share your answers with us in the comments. For me, the answer would be pictures and home videos. A few years ago, one of my cousins called me asking if I could help him recover his hard drive because it had failed. Unfortunately, he didn't have a backup and, long story short, he lost baby pictures of his daughter that we were unable to recover. So I urge you to set up a backup system if you haven't already. I recommend following a 3-2-1 backup strategy. That's a minimum of 3 copies of your data, which includes the working copy, 2 different mediums or devices, like an internal hard drive and an external hard drive, and 1 copy off-site, which would be something like a cloud backup solution such as Backblaze, or even a hard drive that you keep in the office or somewhere else. Of course, the key to backup, in my opinion, is that it be automatic so you don't have to spend any time thinking about it. Set it and forget it. On Windows 10, click Start, Settings, Update and Security, Backup. Plug in an external drive or connect to a network drive, and then click Add a Drive. On macOS, click the Apple menu, System Preferences, Time Machine. Plug in an external drive or connect to a network drive, and then click Select Disk. If you have a backup system in place, that's awesome. I recommend you test it every few months to ensure that you're able to recover files from it. It would be terrible to have a backup system in place and then discover that it doesn't work when you need it. Periodic testing of your backup can help ensure that you don't find yourself in that situation. Okay, when it comes to external drives, people focus on several specifications. The first spec is capacity. How much data can the hard drive hold? You'll see storage reflected as megabytes, gigabytes, or terabytes. A gigabyte is 1,000 megabytes, and a terabyte is 1,000 gigabytes. After that, you'll see whether the drive is a SATA drive, which contains a spinning platter, a solid-state drive, which is also called an SSD, or an NVMe drive, non-volatile memory express. I just listed them from least expensive to most expensive. Another important drive spec is read-write speed, which is how fast you can read information that's on the drive and how fast you can write information to that drive. For example, the computer I use every day is a 2019 16-inch MacBook Pro. It has an internal SSD with a read speed of about 2,600 megabytes per second and a write speed of about 2,400 megabytes per second. The next spec people focus on is what kind of connector or interface does the drive have. You'll want to choose based on what your computer supports. The connector and the standards it supports will affect the read and write speed, but I'm getting ahead of myself. External drives usually come with the cable you'll need to connect it to your computer. There are several connector types that support different connection speeds across several different form factors. Thunderbolt 3, which is the same thing as USB 4, is the fastest and supports transfer speeds of up to 40 gigabits per second. That's 5,000 megabytes per second. The next standard is USB 3.1, which supports transfer speeds up to 10 gigabits per second, which is 1,250 megabytes per second. The next is USB 3, which supports speeds of up to about 5 gigabits per second, and that's around 625 megabytes per second, with USB 2.0 coming in last, which supports speeds of up to 480 megabits per second, or about 60 megabytes per second. Here's a picture of the different types of connectors across each of the various connection speed options. As you can imagine, the higher data transfer options cost more. The kind of drive I recommend is an NVMe drive with an M2 form factor. And then I recommend you get an enclosure to contain it. NVMe stands for Non-Volatile Memory Express. It's super fast. The one I bought has a read speed of 5,000 megabytes per second and a write speed of 4,400 megabytes per second. If you crunch the numbers, you'll see that this falls within the speed range of Thunderbolt 3. Of course, if you're on a computer that doesn't support Thunderbolt 3, you can buy a different enclosure that'll work with your computer. Choosing an enclosure gives you flexibility, and in the future, if you get a computer that supports the faster transfer speed, you can move your NVMe drive into the new enclosure at that time. So how can you tell what your computer supports? On a Mac, click the Apple logo, then click About This Mac. After that, click System Report. In the hardware section, look for Thunderbolt/USB 4. If you don't see that, then look for USB. Collapse the sections in the USB device tree and look for USB 3.1. If you don't see it, then look for USB 3.0. On Windows, click Start, then type Device Manager and press Enter. In the System Devices section, look for a Thunderbolt controller. If you don't see it, then look for USB 3.1 or USB 3.0 and so on. So here's the recap. Buy an NVMe drive and choose your own enclosure. Pick an enclosure that works with your computer. You can always upgrade enclosures later and move into one that's faster if your computer doesn't support Thunderbolt 3. Back to the external drive. I bought a 1 terabyte drive by itself along with a separate USB-C, that's 3.1 hard drive enclosure. The drive I bought was $150 and I got a $20 enclosure. With some enclosures, you can insert the drive into it without using any special tools and then use Windows or macOS to format the drive. For me, assembly took just a few minutes and the drive has been working flawlessly ever since I got it. On the Mac, use Disk Utility to partition the drive as APFS if you plan to use the drive on Mac only, or as exFAT if you plan to use it on a Windows computer too. And on Windows, you can format the drive as NTFS for Windows only use, or as exFAT if you plan to use it on a Mac also. Let's use an app that can test our hard drive read and write speed. That's what professional technicians use to check performance. I put a link in the description to a PCMag article that describes how they go about testing the drives they review. The app we'll use is Blackmagic Disk Speed Test, which is specifically made for Macs. In the PCMag article, they cite apps that'll do the same thing on Windows. For this first test, we'll grab the enclosure and attach the cable that will let us connect to a standard USB 2.0 port. Then I'll take the other end of the cable and insert it into the USB 2.0 port of this hub. Now let's jump over to the Mac. I've already opened the Blackmagic Disk Speed Test app and pointed it at our external drive. You'll see that the read speed and the write speed are both around 38 or 39 megabytes per second, which is below the 60 megabytes per second maximum that we were expecting, which is not surprising. Most of the time these maximums are theoretical. That translates to roughly 300 megabits per second out of the possible 480 megabits per second that the USB 2.0 standard can support. But what does this mean in practical terms? We'll take this 1 gigabyte file that's on our hard drive and drag it across to the external drive. It takes about 25 seconds for the file to go. Now let's try the same tests with USB 3.0. We'll insert the cable and then jump over to the Mac. We'll see that our transfer rate tops out around 430 megabytes per second, which is around 3.5 gigabits per second, just shy of the 5 gigabit max that USB 3.0 supports. In practical terms, that same 1 gigabyte file takes only 3 seconds to copy to our external drive. Now let's test the USB 3.1 connection, or USB-C. We'll see that the transfer rate is just over 900 megabytes per second, which comes in at around 7 gigabits per second, just shy of the 10 gigabit max that USB 3.1 supports. In practical terms, that 1 gigabyte file takes just 1 second to copy over instead of the 25 that we saw with USB 2.0. Oh, before I forget, I should say that these drives do get hot, and depending on the drive you get, if it gets hot enough, the transfer speeds will slow down to about half of what you've seen here when you're transferring hundreds of gigabytes of files. Do you have an external drive? Tell us about it. If you found value in this video, click like and consider subscribing. Do you have a tech question? Leave a comment, and thanks for watching.